delete it and then reload it. That's what I had to do.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. The syllabus says that if you have to re-upload it because it was in the wrong format, and it's late because you had to re-upload it, that it's late. And that sounds really mean, but I'll have mercy on you this time if you need to replace it. Okay. I always feel really tough when I'm writing a syllabus, you know? Tough and rigid, and then when we get in class, I kind of lose a little bit of that edge, unfortunately. All right. Let us continue. So we've said God has revealed himself. So now the question is, what has God revealed? Now, it's easy now for us to start to get speculative in this section on the nature of God. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to try to discipline the doing of theology in such a way that we are making biblically defensible statements. That doesn't mean that we are going to be able to cite book, chapter, and verse for everything that we say. But there are a number of things that I think it's important for us to say about God that are not necessarily said explicitly in the text of Scripture, and I think that'll make sense as we go. When we talk about the study of theology proper generally proceeds along the trajectory of, first of all, talking about revelation. God has revealed himself. And then you address the question of what the nature of God, and that's what we're doing, the divine nature and the divine attributes. The question of the nature of God is, if we can ask this reverently, is sort of like the question, what sort of thing is God? What is God? Okay, I think we can say, what sort of thing is Andy Snyder? Well, he is a human being, and we could talk about the nature of humanity. That's kind of the question. And then we could say, what is Andy like? Then we start talking about physical characteristics, age, character traits, okay, those kinds of things. So the study of theology proper tends to proceed along those two categories. What is God's nature? What is he? And then what are God's attributes? What is he like? So that's the plan. When we talk about the nature of God, we're making basic statements about what he is. And so we'll say some things that they may seem cryingly obvious to you, or maybe a couple of them will maybe not seem quite so obvious. I used the puzzle image as we begin, because when I start a discussion of God, I'm reminded of an essay by D.A. Carson where he's talking about doing theology proper. And he said, theology is not like, I can't remember if I've used this already with you, but theology is not like where you have a 500-piece puzzle and you're missing the last two pieces, or some things we just can't quite explain about God. So doing theology proper is like having a 10,000-piece puzzle where a third of the pieces are missing, because there is that much transcendence about God. I don't think I would go quite that far, because I think it's appropriate, and Carson would agree, it's appropriate to rest in the level of revelation that God has given us. He has revealed to us exactly what he wants us to know. And by being faithful, we can come to know him personally and know about him. So our discussion of the divine nature is gonna have, I believe, 4. God is personal. God is infinite spirit. God is a Trinity. And I think that's it, maybe just 3. God is personal. God is infinite spirit. God is Trinity. He is 3 in 1. And God is holy. That's the 4th one. God is holy. So those are the 4 categories, and I think we could probably cover all these. Cover them all. All right, so the divine nature. First of all, we see the first category is that God is personal. What we mean here, see, there's an apologetic value to each one of these. We're contrasting the true God with false gods, with false conceptions of God. You know, with the gods of pagans, the gods of Buddhism, Islam, other gods. Now, we're not doing a study in world religions here. We're just going to be making positive statements about God and not interactions. But that's one of the reasons why these categories, personal, that God is infinite spirit. There are biblical statements and conclusions, but this helps us to be specific about the true God. This is the true God as opposed to false gods. God is personal. When we say God is personal, we don't mean he's easy to talk to. We mean he is a person. He has the attributes of personhood as over against being just a force. That he's not Star Wars. He's not the Force. May the Force be with God. We're not talking about the good side of the Force as opposed to the dark side of the Force. So what are attributes of personhood? First of all, intellect. God has the attribute of intellect, which means God knows and understands himself and his creation. He knows and understands himself and his creation. I've already made reference to the knowledge of God, unsearchable, and I've got that same passage here. And we'll also roll the concept of wisdom in here as well. And I've given you a few proof texts. I'm not going to stop to look them up. I've given you just a brief quotation of each one. But I'm sorry, was there a question coming in there?
No.
Okay. So the knowledge of God is a frequent topic of Scripture. Repeat what you see in here. By the way, in case you haven't figured it out, I try to keep some variety going between the slides and what you have in your notes. Sometimes, like this, it'll just repeat what you see so you're not frantically taking notes. This is my way of giving you a little bit of a break from time to time. Sometimes there's big white spaces and you got to fill in. Sometimes there's blanks that you got to fill in. So anyway, I'm trying to keep you on your toes, which can be hard to do for 3 hours at a time. We're actually going to come back to the wisdom of God under the attributes of God, so I won't stop and say anything more about it here. But I mean, it is kind of funny, but I don't really. It's a valid comparison to compare the nature of the true God to the Force in Star Wars, because Star Wars, the religion of Star Wars, is essentially Zen Buddhism, right? So you can contrast the nature of the true God with all the talk about the Force in Star Wars, and you have a pretty accurate contrast between the true God and Eastern religions in general. Okay, so God has intellect. Secondly, he has the attribute of will. He has a will. By that we mean God acts with a sense of plan and purpose. With a sense of plan and purpose. He has a will in the sense that he is moving history according to a predetermined plan. We'll come back to that concept under the topic of the sovereignty of God. Some examples of that we find in Ephesians 1 and Ephesians 3. Accomplishes redemption in history for his glory. The purpose that's stated in those passages is that there might be praise to his glorious grace. So redemption is accomplished for his glory. In Isaiah 43, we see the principle that creation was accomplished for his glory. So God has intellect, will, and, although this is theologically controversial in certain circles, God has emotions. What I mean when I say that is that God displays dispositions and emotions appropriate to interpersonal relationships. Emotions like love, yes, love is more than an emotion, but love is at least an emotion. Anger, joy, sorrow. Dispositions would be jealousy. That's a good example of a disposition. Jealousy isn't really an emotion, but it involves emotion. It's a complex of thoughts and emotions and choices, regard for another person. Dispositions and emotions that are appropriate to interpersonal relationships. In other words, we look at God angry because Moses said for the 5th time, I really don't want to do this. And God gets angry with it, gets frustrated. There's a complex sort of emotion and disposition there that you would expect. The Force does not get angry with Luke Skywalker. In tune with it, or he's not. Or he's either, he's in tune with the other. It's not a question of whether he's interacting personally. You can't have a conversation with the Force. So we're going to talk about this more. And I said this is theologically controversial, sort of, and that's the kind of thing that I'll talk about for a long time because I did my doctoral dissertation on this topic. So it's safer for everybody if we just keep moving at this point. So God has intellect, will, and emotions. And then we could say God has self-consciousness. Self-consciousness. He reveals himself as a unique person and not an impersonal force. In other words, he speaks about himself. He identifies himself by name. I am Yahweh. And, in the in our English translations, we sort of fell prey to this tradition that we translate the name Yahweh as Lord in all caps. And so we get confused when God is referred to in the Old Testament as Adonai Yahweh, Adonai meaning Lord. And so we have to figure out how to say Lord, Lord, without sounding goofy. And so different translations deal with that in different ways. But Yahweh is a name. When God is giving the 10 Commandments, he's saying, you must not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain. And he actually is speaking the name. But without getting into all the translational stuff, the point here is that God does identify himself by name. When you introduce yourself to somebody, you don't just say, I'm human. You're a specific human with personality, with a unique identity, and so you identify yourself by your name. He goes as far as to be jealous for his name. That's why he insists that his name not be taken up in vain, which is not just using his name as a curse word. It means taking up his name in an oath, or carrying his name and saying, I identify, I'm an Israelite and Yahweh is my God, and then you disobey his law. That's taking his name in vain. He's jealous for his name. And then finally, this is an awkward word, but hey, we do that sometimes. Relatedness, the attribute of relatedness. God enters into relationships with other persons. More specifically, he makes covenants, he hears prayers, he blesses the obedient, he judges the rebellious. Okay, the force doesn't do that, any of that. God enters into relationships with other persons, and we might emphasize he enters into interactive relationships with other persons. Will, emotion, self-consciousness, relatedness, these are all attributes of us too, aren't they? Because we're persons. And I think personhood is one element of what it means that we're made in God's image. We're made in his image, and we're able to bear that image in exercising dominion over his creation on his behalf, essentially ruling God's creation on his behalf because we're like him. We are relational. God is relational simply on his own because he is three. He is three persons. And so all of these attributes apply to him simply in himself, apart from whether or not we exist. We'll come back to that. Okay, God is personal. That's the first category of what it means, how we describe the nature of God. Any questions about the wholeness? Somebody ask a question so I can eat some potato chips. No? Second category, God is infinite spirit. God is infinite, not just spirit, but infinite spirit. The most obvious aspect of that is that he doesn't have a body. Corporeal is simply a long way of saying that God's existence does not include a body. Which is not to say that God can't manifest himself in bodily form. It's simply to say that God does not, it is not of the nature of God to have a body. Okay? It's possible for us to exist, but that is not the way God intended. In other words, that's not our complete nature. When we die and we are with the Lord waiting for his second coming, the final defeat of evil, the new heavens and the new earth, when we receive a glorified body, until then, we exist without a body in some way. It's not clear to us. But that's not a natural state. In other words, that's not the way God created us. He created us to be embodied, but he himself is not embodied. Jesus said to the woman at the well, when he's emphasizing that not now that he has come, worship is no longer going to be about a geographical location. And he says, the hour is coming now is that those who worship God will worship in spirit and truth. Those are the kinds of worshipers that the Father is seeking. Because God is a spirit, those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And we won't stop and debate what it means to worship in spirit and truth. I think it means to worship genuinely from the inner person. God is spirit. His existence is not about being in a particular geographical location. We as spirits can worship him in spirit and truth. Spirit meaning the inner part of the human.
Isn't it 2 Corinthians 3:17 that says God is spirit? Where the spirit of God is, there's liberty.
Okay. In the flow of that context, this is talking about Moses, who, the veil is over his face, and the gospel is veiled to those who don't believe. But when one turns, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And so the emphasis there is, it does say the Lord is the Spirit, and there's an article on it, which seems to give it a different emphasis. The Spirit. The Lord is, in other words, the Spirit we're talking about here is the Lord.
I got you.
Sharp observation.
Just I guess off topic. Christ, was he a spirit before he became human? Or how is that? What was that? Because I'm like, God is spirit.
I think Jay should answer this question.
Consider the Holy Spirit.
Do you need some more chips? You need some more chips?
Yeah, I need some more chips.
God is spirit, the Holy Spirit is spirit as a body, but before there's Holy Spirit, Jesus was spirit.
Short answer, yes. Philippians 2 says he existed in the form of God, but he made himself nothing and was made in the likeness of men, humbled himself unto obedience as a man. In the form of God, he took on the form of a servant. So he added, graduate theology class, so we're going to use big words. He added corporeality to his person. So he didn't become less than God. He added humanity to his deity. And he is everlastingly now the God-man. Even in his glorified form now, he still has a body. He's human. He's glorified God-man. So yes. You have to remember, we're going to talk about the Trinity here.
Yeah.
We have to remember that before the incarnation, God was not three spirits. God is three persons, one essence. God is spirit.
Say that again, before the incarnation.
The question was, before the incarnation, was God the Son? Short answer, yes. Because God is spirit, and God the Son is God. Therefore, prior to the incarnation, when he added humanity to his deity, he
Hey, Andy.
Eso es la razón que no me gusta clases de
We don't do that.
Español.
There's no time.
That's the reason I want to go my classes.
What were you thinking?
Spanish.
No. Say again.
Esa es la razón no me gustan las clases de video.
Don't do stuff.
Mama does that say.
Ahí en la calle de Berkeley.
You're gonna go up there and.
La calle se
All right,
llama
y'all.
Berkeley.
I'm out of here. Out of here. My attention's. Is it gone? It's okay. I'm used to it.
Oh.
I got a long time with it. A long time. Sweetness is just sweetness. Bye, y'all. Bye. Bye.
Bye, Kathy.
Yeah. Yeah, but you have the same attention span as you cannot leave. I know he does. He love that.
can spend 3 or 4 minutes on something. How to do it, do something.
I can do it as long as I'm doing it. I can pay attention as long as
When you're drawing or
I'm doing it. Yeah, that's why I got all this
writing.
stuff on here.
Don't worry, it's got a picture of Hank on there.
Yeah, I do.
Did you draw?
Yeah.
You're what? Your dog?
There's David.
Sunday, he told me to go outside, go in his backyard and see if his dog was out. So I pulled my gun out.
Oh, there's
I'm
Hank.
always,
Hey.
It will like you.
yeah.
I don't know.
He's got his own in his mouth.
Yeah.
I don't understand what to do here.
I text Scott and I got that message and then he said he's leading worship tonight. So I was like, oh, yeah, he's
The last time it did this, it just would come back on, remember? Right there.
He has to know we're gone.
Yeah.
Saying so I'm not understanding those.
And I just learned how to say that from my Spanish.
Oh. You're good. That sounds like you've been saying it for years.
I've been learning for 26 years.
What did you not understand?
Oh,
You said word?
yeah. No, I'm kind of like her, just kind of.
I wanted to understand that, what he was saying. And I was taking that, but I was probably misunderstanding.
Yeah, that's what I hope I was, because
Yeah.
it sounded like he was not. I don't know.
When he was talking about.
No, that was earlier. I don't know what to do. 'Cause he don't have his phone on me.
Maybe,
We're going to Honduras in February, so I'm trying to study up and make my Spanish a little bit better.
Andy,
great.
Mission trip. Me and Rachel, and Jennifer, and Devin, and my wife, and her husband, and Natalia.
Natalia.
I call her Natalia.
What's her name? That's her
I'm
name.
Paula.
Oh, that'll be a great group. Yeah.
I'm gonna be the guard.
Yes, he's the guard for the.
Camp.
You probably have had.
A little
You're
experience.
probably qualified.
I don't know, the Paco there?
You won't have to.
You don't know what to do?
oh my goodness.
Text
I
him
don't
maybe,
know where my
or,
tongue.
Should I hang up?
yeah, I would hang up.